Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, at this point, hopefully everybody's finished God of War Ragnarok, or so you think, and this is one of many games, especially in the last few years, that have many things to do after you've hit the end credits, and even then there's two sets of end credits, which will tell you how to reach the second one as we go, but we just thought we'd run down various things that are in the end game, let's say.
Because there's some crazy stuff
There's some unbelievable stuff here, and again, full, obviously, massive spoilers for the game. We're not going to hold anything back here because these are just ridiculous things that clearly a lot more people should see if you haven't already, which is to say that you messaged me saying you found Tyr,
dude,
in the end game.
I lost my head, and I'll tell you what, I thought I was, obviously you hit credits in a game like God of War, and I had completed all of like the main side missions as well.
Yes.
So I had some things to mop up, but I thought there's nothing left for me to uncover in this game. I played it for 40 plus hours. There's gonna be no more surprises concerning the plot.
Yes.
And then I went on Reddit with the knowledge that I thought, the arrogance that I thought I couldn't be spoiled, and it was like, oh, wasn't it crazy that Odin was Tyr the whole time? Isn't it crazy that he's dead? And someone just replied, Tyr's not dead.
Is he though?
He's a Niflheim, and you can go find him right now. And my eyes practically fell out of my skull because that is such a great secret to hide in the end game, and it reminds me of like going out on your own volition to find Edgar Ross at the end of Red Dead Redemption 1.
Exactly. Which is like one of the best moments in gaming
100%. In the mission itself to find Tyr is great, and the surprise was still like astonishing, even though I knew he was in the world now. And I just love the fact that he is there and you can find him, in how that one moment that isn't signposted reframes a lot of what you thought about the plot so far.
And especially the depiction of Tyr, because obviously you have the twist that Odin's been masquerading as Tyr the whole time, but the way that Odin played Tyr in front of the rest of the gang and everything was a way more, almost like hyper-pacifistic version of that character, where he didn't want to engage at all. He wasn't even present during one of the invasion fights, maybe because he was having some agency in trying to take that fight over. But still, there is that general reframing of what you were talking to across the story. But in general, though, once you go and find Tyr, it's either Niflheim or Helheim. We'll have the footage of it, we'll put it on screen.
Yes.
But it's you go down to the realm and you realize that there's actually a prison there that's been opened up because of everything that's happened for the various other fights that have happened until that point in the game. And you can descend into the prison, you can find various other bits of lore and things like that. And then you do find Tyr, who says, I can't process that everything's happened, that Odin's dead, and all the realms of the whole fight happened and everything. I will find you guys when I'm ready. And you tell him where we're in the realm between realms, and you can find us there. However, Tyr does pop up in various other places. You can also go and see him in Vanaheim, where he's talking to the rest of Freya's camp, which is another place that you can have another conversation with him. He just seems to be active in the realms after this, which is a really cool idea that the game carries on afterwards.
And what I love about his dialogue in the jail specifically as well is that he responds exactly how Tyr should have, and you never picked up on it originally. And specifically the line where he says, Kratos, I know that name. Surely, he recognizes Kratos because obviously he's traveled all the realms, he's been to Greece, he knows about the gods there. But that conversation weirdly never came up with fake Tyr, and I thought that was kind of weird at the time, but I just kind of went with it because I thought maybe they'll talk about it.
He's all like malnourished and
it's like, well, that wouldn't be immediately on your mind. You've changed as a person. You've been in jail for God knows how long. But then it's immediate. Like, oh, you are the real Tyr because you have the real Tyr's memories. And it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't notice these discrepancies before that you are now fully embodying in only like 5 lines.
And I love the idea of, if you did notice that, if you were going into Ragnarok when you had Tyr, that character in front of you as Kratos, just thinking, well, I found Tyr's vault in the original game. Why is Kratos or Atreus not asking these questions? And they almost Wakanda forever it and give you that at the very end. But here's the obvious thing for that plot point that you might have been wondering about. The next one down, just to run a few of these down.
Just before we move on, actually, can I ask you just like your personal opinion on that? Do you like the idea that Tyr is alive and could be involved in future games, or do you think the twist itself worked better if Tyr was dead the whole time and there was never a chance of finding him?
No, I love him being alive because the one thing I always wanted from Tyr was a conversation with Kratos. I still want them to sit down and talk about the fact that they are both respective mythologies, gods of war, and I want to know what that conversation. I know Ares was the original god of war, but there's still that whole thing of Kratos taking over across the older games and everything, and just that idea of being bound by such bloodlust or being bound by duty. And I want to know what they've written for Tyr in that regard. I want to have one of those dinner scenes where they sit down with the real Tyr and then have that conversation between Kratos and Tyr for as long as it needs to be.
I love that. Can I throw in a little detail, by the way? That also blew my mind. It will feature on every list we do for the next 4 years. But when Odin
spec up the line
is Tyr, if you have the subtitles on, the way it's written is just TYR without the accent on the Y, I think it is, which is how Tia is written in every other line of dialogue. And when you meet Tia at the end proper, it's written with the accent because he's the real Tia.
That's incredible.
I love that detail, and it was there the whole time.
Because I love, speaking of the subtitles, when he morphs from Tia to Odin, the subtitle like kind of like switches, and it's like he was talking switches on the actual subtitle, which is really cool. Because I remember I just had the subtitles on just in general and watching that scene unfold and seeing the subtitle change to Odin saying something. I was like, what? And then realizing he's on screen. It's brilliantly done. But yeah, in terms of another thing you can go and find is Thrud. You can go to Anaheim. It's that location next to where Lunda is. She's just hanging out. It's where her general shack is, the place where you would buy stuff near the beginning of when you would warp into what was initially the first magic gate in Anaheim. Around there, you can find Mjolnir, the hammer. It's just been left there for whatever reason. And Thrud is just nearby. She's sort of sitting nearby. And there's just a general thing where Atreus and Kratos try to make some motion to interact with her, and she picks up Mjolnir and flies off. And I think it's Atreus who says she'll be okay, like, you know, she'll be fine going forward. Which is just that general conversation. We did a different video on this about what they might do going forward, because Cory Barlog over on Twitter has said that there will be another game. So whatever that is, whether that's some sort of spin-off thing or whatever, but we do have the idea of Thrud carrying on from where Thor left off, which she's a really cool character. I feel like you could just give her the hammer and you could just see however she manifests the various actions that happened going forward. You can also find her next to Sif at the very end.
Yes, you certainly can.
She sat down next to a campfire.
Yeah.
So there is that
A lot of those characters you can find just all over. You can also find Sif in Vanaheim as well, near Lunda's workshop, and they're just kind of like there talking because she and the other remaining Aesir are now being integrated with Vanaheim thanks to Freya, etc. There's just a lot of life to the world after the credits that we're going to jump into.
You can find, I should have written the dude's name down because I didn't have this as one of my main 6, but you can find that dude you talk to in Asgard when you're playing as Atreus. I think it's Skolda. You can find him in the middle of like Niflheim, and he's trying to prize a coin out of a rock. And it's the coin that was flipped away when Kratos and Atreus had an argument.
Nice.
And he's trying to get it back out, so you can go find that too. Another huge one is Brock's funeral. This is the one thing in the game that it does flag to you at the very end. It does say there's a gathering going to be happening for Brock in Svartalheim, so if you want to go there, you can find it. Worth just highlighting this before we move on, because the funeral scene is one of the best scenes in the game. Adam John Harrington's performance as Sindri is unbelievable, and the piece of music that Bear McCreary plays, which is also like Bear McCreary in the game, playing the guy with the whatever that machine is.
Didn't know that.
Instrument that he's playing, bit of that. It's a lovely piece of music, and that whole scene is incredibly done, and I love that they hang on to Sindri's rage in that scene. It's one of my one of the favorite scenes from that character overall.
Considering how happy the regular ending is, yes, it might be a little bit downbeat, but we end with Kratos, you know, becoming potentially like the new All-Father. We've got Atreus finding who he wants to be and going off his own adventure, to then get this like second credits final sequence where you are reminded of the grief and the rage that Sindri is feeling, and ending on that great musical note, but specifically the final line by Mimiya where he says a hole, and Kratos is like, what?
Yeah.
And he's like, what gets bigger the more you take away from it, paying off Brock's pun that he was, you know, kind of teasing him with all the way throughout the game that he couldn't get. I just thought, man, what a way to drive that kind of somber note home.
There's also a whole thing as well, if you spend time just exploring. I think the dialogue only really happens in Vanaheim, but there's a whole thing about Kratos saying he doesn't really like riddles because you can always solve them immediately. Yeah. And Mimiya says, you know, he'll devote his life to finding the one riddle that he does like. And there was a little payoff to that in some Vanaheim dialogue. But I like even that. I like even the idea of that resonating with Kratos, even if he doesn't specifically speak it. There is just that riddle as an encapsulation of the mentalities that Kratos has been through, and the encapsulation of grief and the cycle of grief and anger and understanding, etc. The funeral scene is incredible. The next one that we had down is that you can acquire something called the mystical heirloom, which just makes an animation where Kratos just kind of bangs the heirloom on his wrist.
Love it.
Or on his forearm. This only activates in specific parts of the open world. They're mainly to activate stone statues of either dragons or of giants. Not giants in the same Jotunheim sense.
No.
Trolls, I guess.
Trolls.
Big lads. You can fight some of them, so it depends. I've only found a couple of places where you can trigger this. You did it in Svartalheim. You can go up to a dragon statue and tap. You just do the L1 circle thing after you've equipped it, and that dragon will come to life. I think you do a boss fight, little mini boss fight.
They're all mini boss fights.
Yes, and the one that I found was in Noatun's garden in Vanaheim. There's a couple of big trolls. They look too well rendered for them just to be in. I was like, I'm going to fight them, so I banged the amulet thing, and they came to life. That's another little mini boss fight.
Scott, I became obsessed with this in the early game because you could like walk past a few of these statues, and I think Mia always says, like, oh, they're sleeping. If only we had something to wake them up. And what I love about most of the things we're talking about here is that they're not like signposted. They might have been referenced in dialogue, but it's up to you to find that relic, and then it's up to you to go to the stone enemies and then try it out. So when you do it specifically on the dragon and suddenly it shakes off its debris, it comes to life. It's one of those moments that I just never got from the gameplay in the first game. Like, I loved God of War 2018, but a lot of its content for me was signposted. There wasn't like too many mysteries outside of maybe the treasure chests that you can find. But here it's like, well, you can go on an adventure, maybe find Tia. You could go this way and find Thrud with Melania. You can go and wake up all of these secret bosses you might not have even known were in the game. And to me, that's a little bit more rich, a little bit more rewarding, and certainly more memorable.
I tell you what I thought of, and we've done a whole other video on where they might go for a future game, but this idea of something being encased in stone is a very Medusa-like thing to do.
It is.
God of War 3 had you pick up the Medusa's head. There was a whole thing we talked about in the other video, which go check that out for this idea in full. But David Jaffe, back for the original God of War 3, had the idea of Medusa's head playing a role in that game's original ending. And there's the fact that that's something that could be used. Maybe Medusa or someone had some sort of travel through this realm, froze a bunch of different stone, different dragons, different trolls or whatever, left a mystical heirloom to do, because that's why it's called mystical heirloom, because they can't understand what it is.
I dig it.
I'm just saying, if that comes true in another 4 or 5 years, then you heard that here first.
And they do actually talk specifically about Medusa herself in the kind of like random dialogue. It's just something you can miss. It's just while they're talking. I think Kratos might talk about it with Freya, but it's when he's talking about, like the old world, and then he talks about, how he fought a creature who could turn men into stone, and you could either use a mirror to kill it, or you could cut off its head, and then they're like, oh, which one did you did? And he's like, you can probably guess.
I wanted the weapon.
Yes.
It's a good way to go. The next one down is just the idea of the Valkyries do permeate this landscape.
There you go.
After you've hit the credits. Now, I haven't fought the Valkyries yet, but you know a little bit more about them.
Yes, well, I also haven't fought the Valkyrie Queen, but if you recall, in the final assault on Asgard, it is revealed that Odin appointed a new queen, if I recall correctly, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. It's Gna, I think. Gna, who used to work with Freya. So the idea is, in the post-credits scene, they're waiting for you in the Crucible, in the Muspelheim trials, where you went to complete those, and then you eventually, have a boss fight with her, like you did Sigrid in the original game, and I'm really looking forward to getting to do that, Scott, because that was one of the threads that I kind of thought was just a little bit weird in the main game.
Right.
But now if they're following up on it here, that's cool. I like that a lot of the but a lot of the things I thought were left lingering from that final quest, they just kind of go, well, all of that stuff's actually in the end game.
Yeah, I like they sort of seed the world. Like, as long as you make a point of exploring, the whole bit at the end is like Kratos is going to go across all 9 realms with Freya. You might as well, because you'll get lots of different dialogue per realm, and you can just explore in general, and they pay off the vast majority of that. And the last one that I had down is that you can visit the Ironwoods as Kratos. There is a magic gate that opens up. If you go into the map, you can just hold X on it, and it reopens one of the gates, letting you just walk straight in there as Kratos with Freya to talk to Agraboda, which is a great little sort of like your son's partner is meeting the father kind of conversation. But also it's really special because it's the only time, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, the only time that Kratos cracks a smile, the only time that Kratos laughs. As far as I know, this is the only time he's shown that side of him. But I love that Agraboda is bringing that out of him as a potential partner of Atreus going forward. But they have a whole bunch of conversations, about the giants, the roles that they play in the mythology. Agraboda says that we're a legacy of artisans, and she expects Atreus to be painting more going forward. And then Kratos sort of does a little chuckle and says, "Oh, I like you," and it's like that's kind of fun. I like the fact that they have even that resolution in there as well.
100%, man. What I love about the game on a sort of smaller level is that it has a lot of this incidental dialogue when you return to significant areas that you have been to previously with new events in mind or new knowledge in mind. For instance, if you go back to Tia's cell after you find out that he was actually Odin the whole time, you'll have some unique dialogue with Kratos in Atreus there. And I like that in order for the world to kind of like feel reactive in a way.
Yeah.
And it's a very small thing, but it just does make it feel like you're not going through old levels without any new content. It's
always
like
that
they would probably mention something if they walk past Tia's cell, and then you get that payoff, and it's small, but it just adds a lot.
There's so many. I feel like games like Red Dead 2, Last of Us 2, like just that really top tier, that big echelon of like we have so much money to play with here, so much production time or whatever it is, to allocate to the right areas. They can pay those things off. It's always that thing in games where you explore an area that it feels like a character should respond to, or maybe the devs just didn't have time or whatever, weren't able to put something in, but they can pay all those things off. Pretty much any thought you'll have in the end game of I should go here, or what happens if I go here, will pay something off. There's even something else in I think it's in Helheim, where all of Odin's ravens ended up, and they're all just flocking towards this one giant tree.
Yeah.
That's a really cool thing you should go see for yourself. Just the visual is incredible, but the conversation you have with this weird combined voice of all the ravens is terrifying and incredible, and you also get some rewards there as well, which is really cool. But yes, let us know what you think down in the comments below of the best things you found in the end game since finishing the credits, both sets of credits. There's another one after the Brock funeral stuff. And for now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye. Let us know what we've missed, because this probably isn't even exhausted. You're going to get off. There's going to be like 10 more things, Scott.
7 more Drogo holes, my friend.
Always.
They're everywhere.